Welcome. Thank you for the hospitality of having me here. I'm honored. When Jim asked if I would guest preach today, he must have known that I would be a tad nervous, because I am actually an interfaith ritualist and a spiritual companion, but not a preacher. So he reassured me. He said, look it. These are the friendliest, nicest people you will ever meet. You will love them. And you can talk about anything. I mean anything. Why don't you talk about your book, The Art of Questions? So notice that's the title of today's message is The Art of Questions, which is the title of that book. It happened because not too long ago, I was trying to think of some small thank you gift to give some people who had helped me open a small retreat house in Ojai. And I wanted to give them something useful. I love useful gifts. So I was thinking, what might someone find useful? And I thought about, a really good corkscrew, a sturdy trowel, or maybe a playlist of my favorite jazz tunes. But when I really paused and thought about what I actually find useful, I was thinking about a really good question. When people have really good questions, I think they're so useful. So I put together this little book called The Art of Questions as a sort of small thank you gift. And I thought of it as sort of just a fun tool. Nothing more than that. Just think how useful that a little book of good questions could be at like a floundering dinner party or on a date or while talking to your mother. And I thought it would be lovely, this little gift, but the more I thought about questions, the more profound they became. I began to see how the right question at the right time can actually serve to shape a life. It can help us see who we are and what and how we can contribute. I began to think of every life as sort of a lived response to a series of questions, a lot of those unconscious. So then I began to think, would it make a difference if you made those unconscious questions that led your life conscious? And I thought, I think it might. I think it might further shape your life that way. So what I want to talk about today is not so much the book, but what I learned about questions while compiling it. And then I'd like to share some of the questions that have shaped my life and that hopefully might add something to yours. But first, I'd like to offer a blessing by and of and for the questions themselves, followed by a short passage in Matthew. What are the questions that shape a life? What is mine to do? Am I taking myself too seriously or not seriously enough? Who am I really? Can I survive this pain? Can I forgive? Can I accept forgiveness? Is what I am believing true? Can I respond in love to this moment in reality? Can I respond in love to my current reality? Where, oh where is God? Ask, it says in Matthew, ask. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. For everyone who asks receives, and he that seeks finds, and for she who knocks, the door will be opened. I learned so many things compiling this book. I think the first thing I learned was that questions can't be controlled, although I really tried. They have a sort of life purpose, a kind of jazz about them that's really all their own that you can't control. But I didn't know that at first, so naively, in this effort to make the book more user-friendly, I divided it into these 4 sections. Let's play, sort of really casual, playful questions. Getting to know you, going a little bit deeper. Relationships, mostly about romance and family. And diving deeper, more spiritually directed questions. And I thought this was a way I could make it so that if you wanted to keep things lighthearted, you could, and if you wanted to dive deeper, you could. But I learned that the most innocent of questions could unlock the depths of a person, and that the one designed to create closeness could totally backfire and end up doing just the opposite. So, for example, recently I opened the book with my 95-year-old mom to the section called Getting to Know You. And the question we opened to was, when you think of embarrassing moments, what do you think of? I was flooded with options. I have lots of embarrassing moments, all kind of funny and lighthearted, and I thought my mom would ante up something in that ballpark. But that's not what happened. She instead got quiet and then shared just how hard it was for her to grow up and live into her adulthood with a severe stutter. Just how embarrassing it had been for her to be afraid to answer the front door or the telephone, and how awful it was to struggle to say the word hello. She was visually shaken. This was no lighthearted moment for us. This was actually, I realized, this was the question that I think my mother spent her life answering. Where is your voice? Most of my life, my mother didn't have much of a voice. But after my father died, and I think in that time, she was living her way into that question. She was wondering, where is my voice? So that after my dad died, my mother was left on 40 acres in the middle of nowhere with bad hips and bad knees and only wood heat and fields to mow. And so her 4 daughters, we sat her down and said, you clearly cannot stay living here alone. You can live with any one of us and just let us know. A couple of weeks later, she called each one of us and simply said, I bought a tractor. And I went, what? My mother was the least likely person in the world to go out and buy a tractor. And that was her answer to that question. Where is your voice? Because from 70 to 80 years old, my mother lived on that land and drove that tractor. She answered it. There was her voice. I'd like to give you another example of how a question can end up, once it's articulated, into really shaping and leading your life. The question is, what kind of love do you most long for? What kind of love do you most long for? It was just after the Thomas fire that I got a call. I lost my home in the fire, the woman said. Do you happen to have a place I could stay, for a month or 2 while I find a place to live? And I said, actually, one of my little retreat apartments is available, so you're welcome to come. She came. She didn't stay 2 months. She stayed 2 years. But it was absolutely lovely having her. And what happened one afternoon, we were sitting out front in the front garden with a glass of wine, and we began to play with that question. What kind of love do you most long for? And she said, well, if you look at my relationship history, the answer would have to be sort of bad boys or boys that never become men. And she said, what I really long for is the love of a good man, a romance with a good man. And we began to think if we knew any really good men. Then we thought, do we know any who are single? Do we know anybody? And then she said, you know your neighbor, that widowed retired fire captain? She said, he is a good man, but he's 20 years older than me. He's just too old. But I think, in part, because we sat out there in the garden pondering that question, she kept pondering it, and something began to happen. Once she said out loud that she wanted a good man, and she realized that one actually lived next door, she began spending time with him. His response to her liking him, and he beginning to like her, was to set her up on dates with younger firefighters. Each time she went on that date, she'd come home and she said, it was lovely, but I would much rather be spending time with our neighbor than the guys he's setting me up with. Finally, she asked him out to dinner, and she said, with the help of a pixie margarita, she said, I like you. And he said, I like you too. And she goes, no, I like you. He couldn't speak. That night he couldn't sleep. The next morning at the crack of dawn, I saw him making his way across my front yard to her door. I thought about it, he said, and I'm really flattered, and I do really like you, but I'm too old for you. I'm going to die way before you do. And she said, I did the math. But if you could see your way, I don't know, to giving me a decade of good loving, I would consider myself very lucky. The next day, he built stone steps between our two houses. Then she moved next door. Then they invited me over. Would you officiate our wedding? And could it be in your front garden? And so it came to be that in the exact spot, she verbalized that question, what kind of love do you really want? It got answered with a wedding. So, what are the questions that your life longs to live its way towards? What are you living towards? You know that famous quote from Rilke, live the questions now. Perhaps then someday, far into the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answers. I want to tell you how that happened in my own life. In my early 40s, I was wrestling with a spiritual life that I simply didn't know what to do with. I didn't have a faith tradition. I had no container for the mystical life that I'd had for most of my life. I finally didn't know what to do anymore. I know I needed help. So I took myself just to the biggest church in town, which happened to be the Santa Barbara Mission. In a small room in the porter's office there, I waited. Dressed in those traditional brown Franciscan robes, in walked the town's most known and beloved priest. Even I, who barely knew a Catholic, knew him. He was famous for blessing everybody. He blessed the animals of the town, he blessed every parade in town, and he blessed the Harley-Davidson riders. Father Virgil Cordano, he paused and he listened. I mean, he really listened to my lifetime of an agnostic's spiritual life. After a long pause, he asked, "Are you taking any drugs?" "No," I said. "Have you been diagnosed with a mental illness?" "No," I said. "Have you had any recent surgeries?" "No," I said. And after a series of questions to which I could reply no, he simply said, "I will be here for you any time of day or night." And once or twice a week, for 7 years, I would walk into that office, and he would sit across from me, and he would ask the same question. "So tell me," he would ask, "so tell me, what is going on in the depths of you? What is going on in the depths of you?" First off, I had no clue I had depths to start with, so I wasn't sure how to answer that. And then I didn't know really what was going on in them. But I spent years and years exploring that question. What is going on in the depths of me? And how can I live in response to that uniqueness? Because the depths of each of us is so deeply unique. What is my response to that? And as I think about that, and how's that true for you? What's going on in you? What is your uniqueness, that precious thing that makes you you? What is it called for? What is it asking for to be expressed? Father Virgil gave me the gift of so many important questions. He also taught me that the best questions are not answered as I thought they would be. There was no answer. The answer to the best questions was a lived response, was a living, organic, dynamic, continual response to that question. He also taught me that both love and questions can come with some unabashed ferocity. Not long before Father Virgil died, I happened to be working with a family whose 19-year-old son was about to go to prison. They were just beside themselves. They asked if I could offer the young man some solace, and the best thing I could think of was to take him to see Father Virgil. We had barely sat down when a ferocity overtook Father Virgil that I had never seen. He looked at the young man and said, "Look at me. Look at me. Do you know in your heart that what you did was wrong?" I was just shocked. I thought, this seemed like the last thing this poor kid needed in this moment. He was shaking. "Look it, you tell me, do you know that what you did was wrong?" "Yes," the boy said, "I do know it was wrong." And then this equal and opposite thing happened, just completely suddenly. This incredible amount of tenderness just poured out of Father Virgil. "And in your heart, do you know just how loved you are and how absolutely forgiven? How absolutely forgiven." The young man just broke down sobbing. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." The rod of truth and accountability, the ferocity of that, the rod of accountability, and the staff of unconditional love. Just months later, Father Virgil lay dying. While sitting vigil, he suddenly looked over at me, and tears just filled his eyes. "What's happening?" I asked. My way of getting the chance to come full circle. My opportunity in my way of asking, what's going on in the depths of you? "I'm afraid," he said. He was the last person I thought would be afraid of dying. What are you afraid of?" I asked. "That I won't be able to surrender to love completely. That I won't be able to surrender to love." Sitting with there, all at once I realized, I think this is the essence of a spiritually directed life. This is it. To surrender to love. To live our ways towards that ultimate surrender and death. But we're always living towards that question. How can I surrender just that little bit more? And prior to that question that he asked me, what's going on in the depths of you? I somehow put it together that we have to clear up the hindrances. I had to clear up the hindrances to my own heart so that I could surrender to love more completely. I think I set that bar too high my whole life. I wanted to surrender to love, but I had far too much fear and far too much angst and pain to actually get there. But then I began to see it's a living towards. So those are the questions I would like to close with and to leave you with. What is going on in the depths of you? And how can you, how can we practice for the death that belongs to each one of us, that will be one day ours, by surrendering just that little bit more to love. Thank you.